Well, I'm delighted to introduce Sheldon Hochheiser from the IEEE History Center. He'll be speaking about the view from Murray Hill, Bell Telephone Laboratories in New Jersey, 1941 to 1983. And Sheldon Hochheiser is the archivist, and he's the institutional historian at the IEEE History Center. He has primary responsibility for the IEEE paper and digital records, the images, the artifacts that comprise the archives. Before he joined the center in 2008, he spent 16 years as the corporate historian for AT&T. He also wrote the book Roman Haas, History of a Chemical, and also co-authored the book The High Technology Company, a historical and archival research guide. His research interests include the history of telecommunications, the practice of science and technology in corporate America, and the problem of innovation in a monopoly. Sheldon Hochheiser. Yes, oh, sorry. Sorry. This is soundproofing the proceedings here.
Actually, I think I have a loud enough voice I could do it without it, but I think it's being recorded. Let me add that, unlike Paul, my PhD is not from Rutgers, it's from the University of Wisconsin. On the other hand, I'm a native. I was born and raised in hospital in Newark and raised in Scotch Plains, so I've got New Jersey bona fides. Okay, so the title of my talk is The View from Murray Hill, Bell Telephone Laboratories in New Jersey, 1941 to 1983. First, here's an aerial. So instead of starting with a view from Murray Hill, we'll start with a view of Murray Hill. This is an aerial shot of Bell Labs in Murray Hill about when it was getting up into really full gear in 1959, and you can see by now it's a fairly substantial complex of buildings. I think that by this point there are 7 major buildings plus an auditorium, which is near the bottom of the picture, near the parking lot. Murray Hill is interesting in that it is one of the first, as Alex was talking about, the move to planned R&D campuses, attractive environments, and in many ways Murray Hill is a prototype for lots of what came after. But Bell Labs didn't start in Murray Hill. But one thing Bell Labs was, both before and after, is, what did I do? I hit the thing, oh, sorry. One thing, I assume most of you have heard of Bell Labs. Generally, Bell Labs is considered the leading industrial research laboratory in the world for most of the 20th century. In a sense, it's the closest thing to a national laboratory that the United States ever had. There are many ways to measure this, number of papers, number of scientists, but one convenient thing is to note that 11 Nobel Prize laureates came out of Bell Labs, the first one being Clinton Davison working in New York in 1937, and the most recent were Boyle and Smith for the invention of the CCD in 2009, and that's for work that was done in the period 1969 to 1971. Sometimes Nobel Prizes take a while, but it's just one way to measure the significance of labs. To understand Bell Labs, you have to understand its place in a larger world, and that is Bell Labs was the R&D unit of the American Telephone and Telegraph Company. The American Telephone and Telegraph Company was, until it was broken up by the government in 1984, the national telephone monopoly. It was a private corporation, much of this time the largest corporation in the United States, and almost uniquely, there are companies like RCA which could have a very dominant position for many years in radio and television, but AT&T had no competition. And this, AT&T was clearly very innovative when you see of all the things that come out of Bell Labs, but at the same time, its innovation was shaped by the absence of competition, combined with the service ethos. And you'll see this in my main tale of today, which is the 29-year history of the Transistor project. Okay, Bell Labs, much as RCA Labs started out in repurposed rooms in a manufacturing facility in Camden, Bell Labs started out in this building in New York City on the far west edge of Greenwich Village on West Street. This building was built around the turn of the century, maybe even a little earlier, as a distribution house, a warehouse from the Western Electric Company, which was the manufacturing arm of the Bell system of AT&T. That's where all the stuff got put before it got shipped out to build and maintain the telephone plant around New York City. With that, they started very early putting in engineering, what was called the Western Electric Engineering Department, R&D, which some major achievements came out of it in this era. The first flat frequency response microphone, the high vacuum tube amplifier, the first practical electronic device. The importance of this to the advance of AT&T's business aims, which was to build and maintain and improve the best telephone system in the world, which it did, led them to decide in 1925 that R&D should be not a subset of manufacturing, but a separate full subsidiary, and that's Bell Telephone Laboratories Incorporated, 1925. This was the headquarters building. And again, much as I don't have lots of interior shots, but very similar to Alex's story, they're repurposed rooms originally designed for another use. Bell Labs expands into New Jersey quite early on. There's a couple of problems with having your R&D facility in Manhattan. If you're trying to do radio research, and telephone calls across the ocean went via radio waves. AT&T was very much involved in the development of radio technologies. You can't really do good radio research in the middle of Manhattan. So in the 1920s, Bell Labs expanded into New Jersey in two locations, and it's hard if you think of a map of New Jersey today, but we're the wilderness. One was Whippany, New Jersey, the northern part of the state, where there was a radio research station. The second radio research station was in Homedale. And in Homedale in 1930, still a relatively small facility, a Bell Labs researcher named Carl Jansky invented the field of radio astronomy, something he could not possibly have done on the roof of the building in the middle of Manhattan. Now, much for the same reasons that RCA built a purpose building a little bit later, by the early 1930s, Bell Labs concluded that it needed a purpose-built building. And moreover, it discovered that an awful lot of its scientists lived in New Jersey. So they bought a plot of land in Murray Hill, New Jersey, which is on the Berkeley Heights, New Providence border in northern Union County. And of course, 1931 turned out to be part of this deep economic slide that was the Great Depression, so the building didn't commence until much later, and the first building in Murray Hill opened in November 1941, just before Pearl Harbor. The building expanded, and here you can see this is an early shot, and there's just the one building a few months after the first building opened. It expanded, and gradually in the 50s, more and more buildings were built, more and more people moved from New York to New Jersey. Bell Labs officially moved its headquarters sometime around 1959 and closed the New York building entirely in 1962. And since that point, the center of the Bell Labs operation has been this complex of buildings in Murray Hill. Now, I could easily have given a list of 20, 25 things that happened in New Jersey from Bell Labs. Here's just 6 of them. The transistor, the solar cell, communication satellites, electronic telephone switching, charge coupled devices, Unix, which is the underlying operating system of the internet. I could go on, touch-tone telephones, fiber optics communication systems, digital transmissions, but that's enough. But since I was asked to try and keep the 20 minutes, I'm going to spend most of the rest of my time talking about the long story of the transistor. And you'll see why I say long story once I tell the story. And it shows both the way innovation worked at Bell Labs, and I think in other places, and also the particular strange ways it worked because you were a monopoly. You had no competition. You wanted to innovate. There was a strong drive to improve the telephone system. However, you didn't need to innovate for next quarter's bottom line or next year's bottom line. You could take the time to take the long view and the time to get things right, as an engineer might define right. Okay, so the innovation, the transistor. So this is a well-known publicity photo from 1948 when the transistor invention was announced to the world. The actual eureka moment in December of '47. And in case you know what transistor is the first solid state switch and amplifier. It is the fundamental device that underlies all modern electronics. And the importance of this invention is, in the centrality of everything this invention wrought to modern civilization is enormous. Anyway, so these three guys, this is a stage shot. It's in the lab, but it's after the work's done. And the two guys standing in the back, John Bardeen is the theoretical physicist. His partner, the other person standing, is Walter Brattain, experimental physicist. And the person who's hogging the center of the photo is their boss, William Shockley, who was a brilliant and strange person and also very adept at grabbing credit for himself. Only Brattain and Bardeen's name is on the patent. However, all three men's names are on the Nobel Prize citation. Okay, now why did they invent the transistor? Why was this a project that Bell Labs wanted to invest in? Well, we have to go back to the 1930s now, about 1936. There are some problems. The two major, if you think, subsets of technologies within the telephone network. One, you have these enormous electromechanical switches. Tens of thousands, millions of clacking relays that go up and down and back and forth to, when you dial a telephone call, to see that it goes to where you want. These things filled large buildings. These things, they're electromechanical. You have wear. The amount of maintenance they required was enormous. As the telephone system grew, this became problematical. The second thing is, to send a telephone signal down a long distance, say from here to California, you have to amplify the signals. It goes down a copper wire, the signal gets weaker, you need to amplify it. And that's the high vacuum tube amplifier devised when it was still the Western Electric Engineering Department. Vacuum tubes, I see a number of you are old enough to remember vacuum tubes. They are, if you think of, in a way, they're akin to incandescent light bulbs, which are recent enough that you all should know what they look like. But basically, they give off a lot of heat, which has to be dissipated. They wear out. They're somewhat fragile. Another problem. Are there long-term solutions? Through R&D, can we solve these problems? Well, the interesting thing is the person who asked that question in 1936 is this guy at Bell Labs named Dr. Mervyn Kelly. Dr. Mervyn Kelly was the director of research. If you think, we talk about R&D, right? Research and development. The research are the scientists doing scientific stuff that if it works, more theoretical stuff, basic research that will lead to things that then could be applied. Development are the guys who actually make things that can be produced in factories and put in components and put into use in the telephone system or the television or anything else. Okay, so he's in charge of research, and he says, there's this area of physics called solid-state physics. And there's these stuff called semiconductors, and we know a bit about them. If we could harness this and figure it out, learn more about it, we could perhaps produce a solid-state device that would work to solve both of these problems. Well, since he was the director of research, he was in a position to do something about it, which he did. He started a research program in solid-state physics. He already had one guy on the staff, someone who is little known to history named Russell Ohl, who was a solid-state physicist. And he hired, and it was like the first hire Bell Labs made after a multi-year hiring freeze during the Depression. He hires this bright young guy who just finished his PhD in solid-state physics at MIT, William Shockley. They get to work on the problem. They're investigating the nature of semiconductors, of electron transmission in germanium and silicon. And like with RCA, World War II comes along. The research completely stops for the duration of the war. Shockley's working on sonar. I don't know what Ohl was doing. The research picks up again with additional hires after the war. By the end of 1947, they succeed, and they being Vardeen and Bratton. Vardeen had one idea for what specific technology to use to make a working device. Shockley had another. Shockley's didn't work. Shockley came up with a third one later that worked brilliantly and had a lot of commercial success. So on December 16th, 1947, and the lab notebook is sitting in the AT&T archives in Warren, New Jersey, they succeed with their device, and this is the device, this is the first transistor, producing, amplifying an electrical signal. And they demonstrated it on the 23rd to all the hierarchy in the labs by literally putting this transistor in a circuit with a radio. Oh, not with radio, I'm sorry, with a, and taking it in and out of the circuit, and you could hear the sound volume go up and down in the speaker. Okay, they succeeded, so that's 12 years. And if you want, you say, oh, well, there's 4 years during the war they didn't think. It's still a long time. But first off, what you have in 1948 is a one-of-a-kind thing made in the laboratory. This is not useful. What you need to do is figure out a way, if you're going to do anything with the transistor, if you're going to use it to actually serve as an electrical switch or as an amplifier, you have got to figure out how to make them in quantity at a reasonable yield at a halfway reasonable price. This takes a whole different set of talent. So what happens in a place like Bell Labs is the work moves from those physicists who got the Nobel Prize to this guy named, who's here with Walter Bratton, Jack Morton, the guy in the bow tie, and he's a development whiz. He's really good at taking experimental devices and figuring out with his team. I mean, I'm showing you a picture, but there's all sorts of other people who are involved in this, in how to make commercial quantities. By 1951, they have it figured out well enough to go into production. The production actually takes place across the river in Allentown, Pennsylvania, in a plant that had previously been devoted to vacuum tubes. The first transistors were very expensive at first, like most new technology. And the first transistors went into military applications where, as is true today, cost wasn't a factor. By 1954, there were applications within the telephone system. But it was recognized that the transistor had possible applications, as did its predecessor, the vacuum tube, in all sorts of things well beyond the business of AT&T, and the transistor was freely licensed. And here's the iconic transistor item. This is actually the first commercial transistor radio. Please notice this is not Sony. This is a small American company in Indianapolis, being backed by transistors manufactured by Texas Instruments. It's not Sony. Anyway, and this was a big hit of the 1954 Christmas season, even though $50 in 1954 money is something like $700, $800 today. So it took a while to come down in price. By the end of the 50s, they were inexpensive enough that they ended up appearing in every teenager's shirt pocket. Now, Bell Labs expanded. The Murray Hill building was amazing as a place to work. It was built like Topsy, but the weird corridors and ways you had to go from one place to another almost required people to run into each other in the halls. And the culture of Bell Labs was such that people were encouraged to reach out to people in other parts of the labs who might be able to provide insight. If you were a chemist and you thought you needed the insights of a particular sort of physicist, you'd go talk to one and he'd talk to you, and that was part of the culture. But this encouraged it. They needed another new facility, and they had the big piece of land in Homedale. This is a famous building architecturally. It's designed by Eero Saarinen. One of the interesting things, if you know what an early transistor looks like, and you look at the footprint of the building, the parking lots, and the driveways, it was shaped to look from above like a transistor. It's an architecturally, he designed the building deliberately to make it work as a place for scientists to casually run into each other so they could have these fruitful conversations. It didn't work half as well as Murray Hill, where it just happened. But nonetheless, by the early 60s, there were about 6,000 people working here, at least another 6,000 in Murray Hill, a few thousand in a third major facility in Whippany, which largely did Department of Defense classified work during the Cold War. A lot of Bell Labs people in New Jersey. Okay, now remember why Mervyn Kelly decided in 1936 that he wanted to undertake a program of research in solid-state physics. That was because he wanted to replace those telephone switches. It worked. It only took 29 years. This is the first electronic telephone switch, and electronic telephone switches are basically special purpose computers, being installed in 1965 in a telephone exchange in Succossana in Morris County to replace one of those old clacking electromechanical switches. Number one, ESS. It's the first model. ESS stands for Electronic Switching System, and it's serial number 1. Lots more of them were made, additional models. And of course, it didn't stop from there. From there, they went to developing an electronic switch for the long-distance network, the number 4 ESS, which had some other, this is also, if you're into computers, this is a digital switch. The number 1's an analog switch. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. And my time, so I just want to say, all right, so Bell Labs continued doing this kind of things until the end of the Bell system. What happened? Basically, in a sense, in the monopoly, while there was no line on your phone bill that said tax for R&D, a tiny little percentage of your phone bill went to, of everyone's phone bill in the United States, went to fund Bell Labs. There's no monopoly. That source of funding is not there. It now has to get funded more like the research R&D lab in a normal corporation. And gradually, things slow down. Now, there is still, and so Bell Labs remains part of AT&T. In 1996, AT&T splits up again. So in 1984, what happened is all the local telephone companies became separate companies, 7 regional baby Bells. AT&T kept manufacturing, long distance, and R&D. The long distance had become a competitive business. In 1996, AT&T split up again voluntarily, spinning off all the manufacturing facilities and the Bell Labs name and about 3/4 of the researchers to a company called Lucent Technology, which made its headquarters in Murray Hill. Lucent Technologies, this is Bell Labs in 1997. You can see there's now a nice fancy front entrance suitable for entertaining corporate visitors. Lucent Technology fell on hard times in around 2000, eventually got merged or acquired, depending on whose press releases you read, by a French company called Alcatel, and it's still there, and there's still people there who will tell you they work for Bell Labs, and I don't mean to denigrate what they do, but it's not what Bell Labs could have done and Bell Labs did do and accomplish as part of the national telephone monopoly. And if there's a minute or two for questions.
We have time for one question.
Okay, one question. Oh, my colleague Alex can ask me on Monday. Anyone else have a question? All right, Alex, you can go.
I just thought, Sheldon, you might mention there's a museum that they don't publicize, but it is open.
Yes. The Alcatel Lucent in the lobby of the headquarters building, which means you don't have to go through security to get it, has a very nice, very, very nice museum giving the history of Bell Labs and its achievements.
You might want to add the woman who's responsible for that, Dr. Alice.
Okay. Okay, is this the real question now?
A question, you mentioned that there was a lot of R&D for military purposes.
Yes.
And you were referring to 47. How did the space program factor into
Okay. Well, a lot of the fun, so you're dealing with the Cold War era. And first, at the height of the Cold War, fully 1/3 of Bell Labs' budget came from the DoD. Okay? And so some of the transistor funding for development of the transistor came from the military. Indeed, the first uses, the military could see the values of miniaturization and not giving off heat for putting radar units in aircraft, say. And that's among the first uses. As far as the space program, first off, a lot of that R&D was for guided missile research. It's not the space program of that. The space AT&T formed for the space program isn't military. So AT&T was asked to provide for Project Apollo, for landing a man on the moon, a group to provide the overall management, what's called systems engineering. And Bell Labs set up a special subsidiary called Bellcom, specifically to, so this is what, their job is to coordinate the engineering done by all the other contractors and make sure everything fit together, which is what you have to do if you're running a telephone network. And that was a major contribution, but that wasn't military, so that wasn't secret. Hope that helps.